The Emperor's hatchlings were not merely dragons. They were royal dragons. Each scale was a living jewel, each claw capable of slicing steel. Their eyes glimmered with intelligence far beyond ordinary beasts. No human had ever touched them. No human would. That was the rule. His name was Evan Cross, 23, human, and entirely aware of the danger he had just volunteered for. He had been summoned to the Emperor's floating palace atop the Crystal Towers, a place where air shimmered with magic and danger. "Evan Cross," said the royal steward, "you are here to serve as caretaker for the Emperor's hatchlings." Evan bowed stiffly. "Yes, sir." The steward's lips twitched in a faint smirk. "Observe the rules. Touch not. Feed only from the trays. Speak only when spoken to. Fail, and the Emperor's wrath will be your end." Evan nodded, heart thundering. He had trained in the best human academies, survived training grounds tougher than most armies, and yet he felt fear like a living thing in this palace. He was led to the nursery, a vast chamber glowing with soft amber light. Cribs of gold filigree contained the dragons, each hatchling coiled like a sleeping gemstone. Evan froze. They were perfect, beautiful, terrifying, untouchable. The smallest, a hatchling barely larger than a cat, opened its eyes. A golden glow pierced the room. Its tiny wings fluttered violently. It hissed. Evan's breath caught. This was the first test, he realized. A look could kill. He stepped backward. I'll leave the food here," he whispered, placing the tray down at a respectful distance. The hatchling's eyes followed him. It stretched its claws, talons gleaming. Evan swallowed and left. The Emperor's hatchlings were untouchable. To touch one was to commit sacrilege. Humans had tried before. They had failed. But Evan had an idea, a reckless human idea. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't untouchable because they were untouchable. Maybe they were untouchable because no one had shown them kindness. He clenched his fists. Tomorrow he would try something no human dared. The next morning, Evan Cross returned to the nursery, heart pounding, palms sweating. The royal hatchlings were awake now, stretching, chirping, smoke curling from tiny nostrils. Each one radiated raw power even as infants. The golden-eyed hatchling, the one that had fixed Evan with a piercing gaze, stared directly at him. "You?" It hissed softly, and flared a tiny spark from its mouth. Evan froze. The room smelled of scorched stone, warm and sharp. "Okay, just calm." He knelt on the stone floor, keeping a distance of several feet. "Good morning," he said, voice steady. The hatchling blinked, tilted its head. Evan set the tray closer, offering food, but not touching the hatchling. The golden-eyed hatchling hissed again. Its claws scraped against the crib's gold rails. Evan swallowed, then whispered, "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." Something in the room shifted. The hatchling's eyes softened slightly, curiosity flickering through the glow. Evan took a deep breath. Slowly, carefully, he extended a hand, not toward the hatchling's body, but toward its head, palm open. All the elders and human attendants would have screamed in horror. The hatchling's eyes widened. Smoke puffed out nervously. His tail whipped in agitation. And then, it inched forward. Just a fraction. Evan froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. 1, 2, 3. He leaned just slightly closer and placed the back of his hand gently against the hatchling's forehead. The hatchling flinched at first, but then froze. A silence fell over the room. The tiny creature exhaled smoke slowly, in a rhythm matching Evan's breathing. The first trust had formed. Evan whispered, "You're safe with me." The hatchling blinked again, and then, ever so slightly, it pressed its forehead against his hand. Shock rippled through the palace observers. "Impossible," muttered one attendant. "They're supposed to attack," said another. But Evan didn't care. He had done what no human caretaker had dared. He had touched the Emperor's hatchling, and it accepted him. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Encouraged by this small victory, Evan began leaving small offerings closer and closer to himself, always speaking softly. A hatchling began to chirp, a tiny, happy noise. Then another. Soon, several of the Emperor's dragons were following his hands with their eyes, craning their necks curiously. When he extended a finger slowly, the golden-eyed hatchling nudged it with its snout. Evan laughed quietly. "See? You're learning to trust me." Elder Varix, watching from above, whispered angrily. "This human is reckless. Touching them is forbidden. He risks the Emperor's wrath." Evan, oblivious, was already stroking the hatchling's tiny neck. The hatchling purred, a low, trembling rumble. Smoke curled lazily from its nostrils, harmless. "He likes me," Evan whispered in awe. "He actually likes me." By the end of the day, hatchlings were cautiously approaching Evan on their own. The golden-eyed hatchling followed his every movement. Palace attendants were stunned into silence. And Evan realized, humans don't just survive dragons. They teach them trust. One gentle touch could change centuries of fear. The morning sunlight glinted off the crystal towers as Evan Cross returned to the nursery. It had been 3 days since his first contact with the Emperor's hatchlings, and already the palace staff whispered rumors. The human caretaker has touched them, and they did not strike back. Some said it was impossible. Others were afraid. Evan didn't care about their whispers. Today he had a new goal. The hatchlings had to trust him without fear, even under stress. The nursery was larger than he remembered, filled with warming lights and raised platforms where the hatchlings played. Golden-eyed Cinder, the smallest, fiercest, and yet most curious, flitted from perch to perch, eyes always following Evan. "Good morning, everyone," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. His pulse raced at the idea of interacting again. The hatchlings hissed and chirped, circling each other. Their smoke puffs swirled like tiny clouds. Evan took a deep breath. He set a tray of food closer than yesterday, then stepped forward slowly. Cinder hissed once, a sharp warning. Then Evan did something unexpected. He knelt and looked Cinder in the eyes, not as a caretaker, not as an intruder, but as a friend. "You don't have to be afraid," Evan said softly. Cinder tilted his head. Smoke puffed nervously. Slowly, he stepped forward. Evan extended a hand and let the hatchling nudge it with his snout. The room froze. Even the attendants held their breath. The trust had begun to grow deeper. With trust came mischief. One hatchling, slightly older and larger, leapt onto a platform, knocking over food trays. Food scattered across the stone floor. The other hatchlings squealed and hissed in protest. Evan laughed quietly. "Easy, easy," he said, scooping a piece of fruit from the floor. He held it out, letting the mischievous hatchling eat directly from his palm. The golden-eyed hatchling, Cinder, observed carefully. He inched closer, stretching his neck. Evan smiled. "See? No one's angry." For the first time, the hatchlings learned patience and gentleness from a human. Then came the real trial. The palace steward had summoned a small fire test to ensure Evan could handle emergency situations. A magical flame burst unexpectedly in the center of the nursery. A controlled flame meant to startle the hatchlings. The others screamed and backed away instinctively. Cinder froze. His eyes widened. Evan stepped in front of him. "Stay calm," he whispered, placing a protective hand over Cinder's back. The hatchling trembled. Smoke hissed, but Evan stayed still, breathed slowly, exhaled. Cinder mirrored him. The fire calmed around them. No claws struck, no flames flared. The elders watching from above whispered among themselves. "He's teaching them to control their instinct," one muttered. "It's impossible," another said, but it had worked. By the afternoon, something extraordinary happened. The hatchlings, untouchable royalty, born to strike at the slightest provocation, actively sought Evan's presence. They crawled toward him, pressed their tiny heads against his hands, chirped happily, and even nuzzled his cheeks. Cinder chirped the loudest. A small flame flickered harmlessly from his mouth, bright orange and warm, as if in celebration. Evan laughed softly. "You're all very brave today," he said, feeling a warmth he had never expected. Not just from their fire, but from connection. The elders were silent. They had witnessed centuries of dragon training, domination, and discipline. And yet, here, a human had achieved in days what dragons had not in centuries. Elder Varix descended slowly. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were fixed on Evan. "This human," he murmured. "He does what no dragon can. He bonds without fear. He commands not through power, but through respect." Evan, unaware of the whispering elders, continued to play with Cinder. He placed a small toy ball near the hatchlings. The little dragons batted it around gently, learning to share, learning to trust each other in his presence. This is unprecedented," Varix said. "A human teaching dragons?" The palace staff exchanged nervous glances. "Should we report this?" one whispered. "No," another said quietly. "It is remarkable." As evening fell, Evan sat among the hatchlings, feeding the smallest ones from his hands. Cinder curled against his chest, the golden glow of his scales warm and soft. Evan realized something profound. Humans do not just survive dragons. They change them, through patience, through courage, through kindness. The hatchlings no longer feared. They no longer needed domination. They had chosen trust. And Evan knew the palace and the emperor would not believe it until they saw it with their own eyes. The palace bell tolled at dawn, echoing through the crystal towers. Evan Cross, human caretaker, stood nervously in the nursery. Today, the emperor himself would arrive to inspect the hatchlings. The last few days had been a whirlwind. Dragons had learned to trust him, followed his voice, even sought comfort in his hands. But he knew the emperor's gaze was sharper than any dragon's claws. The golden-eyed hatchling, Cinder, nuzzled against his chest, flames flickering harmlessly along his scales. Evan patted him gently. "Stay calm," he whispered. "It's time to show them what we've done." The air shimmered as the massive doors opened. Sunlight gleamed off gold and obsidian scales. Emperor Kael'thar, Lord of Flame, descended with the grace of a predator and the weight of centuries. His eyes were molten gold, assessing, sharp, and unforgiving. "Cross," he said, voice like rolling thunder. "Show me the hatchlings." Evan swallowed and stepped forward. The hatchlings stirred, but did not panic. Instead, they approached him. The emperor's eyes narrowed. "Untouchable creatures. You have handled them?" "Yes, your majesty," Evan said, steadying himself. "They trust me, and each other." Kael'thar stepped closer. One claw hovered near Cinder's head. The hatchling flinched slightly. Evan placed a hand on his back. "Calm. Steady." Cinder's chest rose in even breaths. Smoke curled lazily. The emperor froze. Kael'thar's voice rolled like fire. "Then show me." He extended a claw, summoning a small pillar of flame between the hatchlings. It roared high, scorching the stone. The nursery trembled. Most humans would have run. Evan did not. He knelt, pressing a hand gently against Cinder's head. "Breathe," he whispered. The hatchlings trembled. Flames flared from Cinder's nostrils, golden and controlled, following Evan's rhythm. The emperor's jaw tightened. He lowered the flame slightly, but still observed every reaction. Cinder chirped happily and pressed his forehead against Evan's chest. The other hatchlings followed suit, leaning into the human's hands. Evan laughed softly, amazed. "You're safe," he said. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The emperor stepped back, stunned. Never had a human taught dragons self-control through trust instead of fear. Varix, the elder dragon, whispered to another, "This human is doing what centuries of training could not." Kael'thar's eyes narrowed, then widened slightly as realization struck. "You have earned their loyalty," he said almost reluctantly. Evan nodded. "Not through dominance, not through punishment, through care." The hatchlings, emboldened by their trust, began playful antics. One knocked over a tray of magical fruit. Another flapped its wings, sending harmless sparks across the room. Evan caught the falling fruit, laughing, and fed each hatchling from his hand. Cinder nudged his shoulder affectionately, a tiny puff of smoke curling around them. Kael'thar watched silently, impressed despite himself. "This is Unprecedented, he said. They are learning joy, play, compassion. Varix murmured. A human. Teaching dragons what it means to feel safe. Incredible. Kael'thar finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. Cross, if you truly can raise dragons, then prove it. Show me they would follow your command in danger. The doors to the nursery burst open. A controlled magical hazard, a fire surge, swept across the chamber, meant to test reflexes. Hatchlings shrieked. Chaos threatened. Evan stepped forward, arms outstretched. Stay close. Cinder stepped before him. The others followed. Flames surged, but Evan's calm guided them. The hatchlings mirrored his breathing, their fire controlled, safe, disciplined. The Emperor's jaw dropped. The hatchlings were not just surviving, they trusted a human in the face of danger. Kael'thar lowered his massive head until he was nearly eye to eye with Evan. You have done the unthinkable, he said. You have touched what no human may, and they have not struck. Evan swallowed. I only wanted to help. The Emperor studied the hatchlings, now calm, playful, even affectionate. They are yours if you can guide them, Kael'thar said slowly. They will learn from you, and the throne acknowledges it. Evan's heart pounded. A human had earned the trust of the Emperor's dragons. A feat no one thought possible. The Emperor decreed. Evan would continue as caretaker, teacher, and protector of the hatchlings. No human could interfere, and no dragon could refuse his guidance. The hatchlings would be trained not by fear, but by trust. The palace staff, still reeling, finally understood. This was HFY at its peak. Humans were small, mortal, yet capable of shaping the most formidable creatures in existence. Not through dominance, but through courage, kindness, and respect. That evening, Evan sat in the nursery, surrounded by dragons, small and large. Cinder curled beside him, flames casting warm light across the room. For the first time, the Emperor's hatchlings were safe, happy, playful, loved. Evan realized the truth. Humans do not just survive dragons. They teach them trust. They change them. They create bonds that no fire, no claw, no ancient law can break. And as the golden-eyed hatchling rested its head against Evan's chest, smoke curling softly, he knew the unthinkable had become reality. He had touched the untouchable and earned loyalty instead of fear. Months had passed since Evan Cross had earned the trust of the Emperor's hatchlings. What once seemed impossible had become a daily reality. Dragons of royal blood followed him willingly, chirped for his attention, and even played safely under his watchful eye. The palace had grown accustomed to the sight of a human kneeling among dragons, feeding them by hand, laughing as fire sparks danced harmlessly in the air. Word spread across kingdoms. A human caretaker had raised dragons without fear or domination. Scholars debated, soldiers whispered, and children dreamed. One afternoon, the Emperor summoned Evan to the courtyard. His dragons, now larger and more confident, awaited him, scales gleaming in the sunlight. Kael'thar, towering and majestic, spoke without anger but with a weight that could shake mountains. Cross, the kingdoms beyond demand proof. Can you command these dragons safely before outsiders? Or is your success only possible in controlled halls? Evan looked at the hatchlings, no dragons, gazing at him expectantly. Cinder nudged his shoulder. He smiled. I don't command them, he said calmly. I lead them, and they choose to follow. The Emperor raised an eyebrow. Then show them. At the palace gates, outside officials and visiting kings and generals gathered. Evan stepped forward. The dragons, ranging from playful juveniles to nearly full-grown royal hatchlings, formed a circle around him. A small fire challenge was triggered, meant to intimidate. Most humans would have scattered. The dragons would have panicked, but not these. Evan raised a hand, and the dragons calmed instantly. Flames softened, wings relaxed. They looked at him, waiting for guidance. Then, in a coordinated display of trust and discipline, the dragons flew in perfect formation, performing maneuvers and returning to Evan's side. They landed gently, each one nudging him affectionately, smoke curling harmlessly from their nostrils. The crowd gasped. They had come expecting fear and chaos. Instead, they witnessed harmony between human and dragon. The Emperor approached Evan, placing a claw gently on his shoulder, a rare gesture of approval. "You have done what no human could have dared," Kael'thar said. "You have proven that dragons can follow without fear, and humans can guide without dominance. This is the future." Evan bowed humbly. "I only wanted to care for them." The Emperor smiled, a rare warmth in his ancient eyes. "Then let this be your legacy. Care for them, teach them, and the world will see that humans are more than mere mortals. They are builders of trust, even with the untouchable."